From inside the MASN newsroom, it is the MASN All Access Podcast. Paul Mancano and Brendan Mortensen here with you. As always, got a polo shirt on to display the casts in their full glory. No more hiding these bad boys. These are out in the open.
It's more of a badge of honor at this point than something that should be hidden. I'm glad that you've taken the step to show the world.
I think they need to be out in the open and honestly get some fresh air. They are removable. That is the good thing. I don't need hard casts. Thanks for asking, Brendan.
I probably should have asked. I mean, to be fair, I already knew that.
You were already driving me around half the time.
I have
giving
been,
me
yes.
rides. So
I should start charging like an Uber.
The star rating, however, would be very low.
Very low.
Just so you know, I would have to.
That's fair.
Respond in kind. It's going to be a good podcast. We're going to have Trey Mancini on the podcast in a little bit to talk about his new podcast, Call Your Shot, which he is co-hosting with Sarah Perlman, who's former MASN All Access host Sarah Perlman.
Would you look at that?
They have already released one episode. It is outstanding. So that conversation is coming up in just a bit. But for now, Brendan and I are going to talk about some potential trade candidates. The trade deadline is mere days away, Monday, if you will.
Which is crazy.
It is crazy. Also, a month from today, the regular season ends. September 27th is the last day of the regular season. The season is just flying by. Orioles are just a couple games under 500, but I think we all know they are going to be at least standing pat, and if not standing pat, selling at this trade deadline. So there are a couple guys that they could be selling off. Before we get into that, though, Brendan, we have to talk about the new wave that is sweeping baseball, and that is the bunt.
Is it sweeping baseball?
It is at least sweeping the Baltimore Orioles. In particular, a couple guys, Cedric Mullins, Andrew Velasquez, pretty much anybody who has speed on this team. Brandon Hyde has said that he's cool with them bunting. He wants them to bunt. He said, we're going to bunt a lot. I love it. Analytics hate the bunt. But when you have a guy like a Cedric Mullins, who is built for the bunt, who really does not barrel up a whole lot of baseballs, obviously does not have a whole lot of power, doesn't even really have gap-to-gap power, but can lay down a quality bunt and can make good use of it, it fits his playing style, and I feel like that's a thing that we have seen from Brandon Hyde, is he knows how to cater a certain playing style for the type of player that he has in the building.
And I think it's kind of similar to like the death of the mid-range jumper in the NBA, where like the analytics will tell you it's just not a shot worth taking because you're not going to get as much value for it as you would either in the paint or at the three-point line. But if you're Cedric Mullins and you're bunting effectively, I don't know what his average is bunting. Bunt statistics are very hard to find.
Very difficult to find.
We have found out through our research because they really don't exist that much because not a lot of people are bunting. But if you're Cedric Mullins and you are hitting well, I mean bunting well, and getting on base, we know he's a threat on the base paths. So if he's on first, he's a threat to steal second. We saw the other day that he's a threat to steal third. So you want that dude on base. And if the way to get on base is bunting, you might as well.
Right. Well, you mentioned the NBA comparison. I like it because there's it gets to the point where to look at it from like a market standpoint, like the market goes all one way. You know, teams all buy into one philosophy to the point where there's an inefficiency in a certain way of thinking. So you have to adjust and say, all right, so many people are not doing this that it's almost an underutilized advantage, and there are advantages to doing it. So, like, for example, you know, in the NBA, they had to find, you know, Carmelo Anthony is still going to take a mid-range jumper because he still is really good at it. That doesn't mean everybody should. That doesn't mean James Harden should. But if you have a guy who does it really well, it's still an efficient shot. So in this instance, you know, bunting is not efficient if you are most players. If you are, you know, probably 95% of the players. But you have a small percentage of guys that are fast enough that can get on base and bunt effectively, that know how to bunt, because it is a skill in and of itself. That if you have those guys on the team, it makes absolute sense for you to do it.
Right. It's all in the percentages and the averages.
Yeah.
Because percentage-wise, let's take a look across the league and say that maybe you're safe at first on a bunt 10% of the time, maybe. If you're hitting like
If every guy laid down a bunt?
if every guy laid down a bunt,
Maybe a little higher.
maybe a little higher.
Yeah.
And then, on a normal swing, maybe you're hitting 250.
Right. Yeah, so it doesn't...
Right. So the averages then would point towards the bunt. But if you are a guy who's going to hit 200, 210, and all of a sudden you can be safe on a bunt 25% of the time and hit 250 with it, the averages point in that direction.
The thing is, Cedric Mullins, I mean, he has the ability to hit the ball out of the ballpark. He's not a total Ben Revere, if you will, but he is going to be grounding out a lot, and he's going to be not driving the ball to the gap, not driving the ball to the wall. So if your options are grounding out or trying to get on base via bunt, you pick the bunt. And the other thing is, I've heard this from, I'm not a baseball scout by any standpoint, but what I've heard is that pitchers are so used to not having to field the bunt, and it's something that they don't really worry about on an average at bat, and they don't worry about coming into a season. That's not something they take extra time. They're worried about pitching. They're worried about adding, ticks to their velocity. They're worried about adding new pitches to their arsenal. It's the same reason they're not going to be in the cage hitting a whole lot. They're not going to be spending a whole lot of time fielding bunts because at this point, most teams don't do it a whole lot. They don't do it nearly as much as they used to. So when a pitcher's faced with a guy like Cedric Mullins who drops down a perfect bunt to his right side and his glove side, and he's got to pick it up and spin, and he has to hurry, and he knows in his head he has to hurry because Cedric is fast, might airmail that throw, or he might stumble over his own feet. So you catch a team off guard that way. And it doesn't work forever. It's not going to work if you face a Zach Greinke who's a Gold Glover, he's probably going to not be phased and just pick it up and toss you, throw right down to first, and you're out by several steps. But you can occasionally catch a guy off guard by doing it. And when you do, you're on base. It's just as good as a walk or a single.
Well, and like you said, at the very least, you're forcing action.
Yeah.
You're putting the ball in play. You're
as opposed
forcing
to
the defense to do something. Yeah. Exactly. So you put the ball in play, something is going to happen. Either the defense is going to make a good play, or you're going to, they're going to trip up and you're going to get on base. Yeah. Putting the ball in play is a lot better than striking out in any scenario.
Right. And when you have a guy like Cedric Mullins, who is a light hitter still at this point in his career, and that he has the potential to be better. But Andrew Velasquez has always been a light hitter in his career, fast guy. There are huge opportunities to take advantage of it. And then beyond just nobody on base, I mean, we were talking about, of course, the extra inning, and it feels like the Orioles have been in 8 extra inning games so far. Extra inning, runner on second, abso-freaking-lutely. You drop down a bunt. I mean, there's no reason not to drop down a bunt. So you move the guy over. You then have a guy at third with one out. You have an out to play with. All you need is a fly ball to the outfield to drive in a run. So absolutely, that's a case to drop down a bunt.
And just to be perfectly clear, if you're Renato Nunez, don't bunt. We're not advocating that the slower guys on the team should be bunting.
No, and there's no reason Anthony Santander should be laying down.
No, and if you are one of the American League's best hitters, and Anthony Santander, please don't bunt. That's not what we're advocating for here on the podcast. But if you're Cedric Mullins or Andrew Velasquez, why not?
Yeah, and I like the fact that Brandon Hyde is just pulling all these tricks out of his bag because he knows that he has to exploit every exploitable area in order to win games. He can't. It's like the Moneyball. If you play like the Yankees in here, we will lose to the Yankees out there. You have to play your own brand of baseball that fits your guys, and he has done that so effectively through the first month of the season. All right, Brendan, trade deadline coming around the bend.
Yes.
I think this year is going to be the strangest trade deadline in a lot of ways. There are so many factors to consider. I think the fact that you have an expanded playoff field, you have 16 teams making the playoffs, means that there are going to be, I think, more buyers than sellers this year, which typically is not the case. So
we just saw it today. I mean, the Blue Jays bought.
Yeah.
And they went out and got a pitcher, and they weren't a team that would have been a buyer had it not been for the expanded playoffs.
No, absolutely not. And had it not been for a 162-game season, on July 31st, they might have been way out of the playoff race. But because they only had to play a month's worth of baseball, you have an okay month. Hey, we might just send a couple prospects some way, and we'll figure it out. The other thing to consider, there's so many factors here. The other thing to consider is, you are going with a smaller database with these guys because You're only going off a month's worth of data for the 2020 season, and you're only getting these guys, at least this year, for a month and then the playoffs. So you're not getting a whole lot, and teams don't have a lot to go by. So it's difficult to kind of get a trade there. Then you have to consider only guys who are on the 60-man player pool can be dealt. So we're going to see a lot of players to be named later.
Can be dealt right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Could be dealt after the season. Who knows when they'll reopen things back up, but can be dealt right now. So what we're going to see is a lot of players to be named later. So if the Orioles trade, a Michael Givens and Alex Cobb for, maybe a prospect and a couple players to be named later, I get the instinct to be like, well, that's nobody.
Right.
Like you don't have a name to attach to that. But odds are they have somebody in mind or a couple guys in mind. Maybe they have a list to pick from, and the other, the Orioles are just waiting. Maybe they have already agreed in principle to trade a guy, but they just can't announce it, and they can't actually deal the guy until after the season.
Right, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a nobody prospect either.
Exactly.
I mean, Heston Kjerstad is not on the Orioles 60-man roster right now, so technically, if somebody, not going to happen, obviously, but if somebody were to trade for a guy like a Heston Kjerstad, he would technically be a player to be named later. So it's not like these guys are just nobodies. There's just guys that aren't on the 60-man roster right now.
Yeah. All right, let's get into the guys that the Orioles could sell at the deadline. And the crazy thing is with this month season, I honestly think that there are some teams that could sell like the Orioles and still be in it by the end of the season. Like the Orioles might trade one or two guys at this deadline and still continue the pace. I mean, we saw they dealt Richard Blyer, and he was one of their most consistent bullpen arms, and they went on a winning streak right after that. So it can happen. So them selling is a look towards the future. It's not absolutely, they're punting on the season. Brandon Hyde is still going to try to win every game. He has said he's in win-now mode. The players are still going to try to win every game. And as we've seen, they're not fazed by the fact that some of their guys might be dealt off. They're just thinking long-term.
And with the wackiness of this 2020 season, the trade deadline is less of, okay, are we in a place to compete right now? And it's more of we're going to stick to the plan. Right. And I think we're going to see that with a lot of teams around baseball. I even look at a team like the Marlins, who are right now firmly in the playoff race. They're second in the NL East. But if you're the Marlins, are you really buying at the deadline? Because their plans right now are still pretty firmly for the future. And I mean, the Orioles are firmly in the playoff hunt as well, even if they're not in a wild card spot currently.
Yeah.
But I don't think that changes the plans for the future at all. I think you're just pleasantly surprised with how the team is playing right now, but that doesn't change the plans for Michael Elias in the front office at this trade deadline.
Nor should it.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. You can't get caught up in it's just too small sample size. All right, let's talk about the 0%ers. These guys that I think legitimately have no % chance of being traded by the Orioles at this deadline. Should I run through them real quick?
Just run through them.
I can take a deep breath. Keegan Aiken, Austin Hayes, Chris Davis, Pat Valleca, David Hess, Thomas Eshelman, Dwight Smith Jr., Chance Cisco, Anthony Santander, Renato Nunez, Rio Ruiz, Asher Wojciechowski, Travis Lakins, Evan Phillips, Andrew Velasquez, Ryan Mountcastle, Wade LeBlanc. Are there any guys on that list that you think should be taken out of the 0% categories? They're all in there for various reasons. Some of them age, some of them injury, some of them contract, but they're all there because I really don't think the Orioles are going to deal any of these guys.
Yeah, I can't see any of the guys on this list getting dealt. The only one that is like a 1% is if somebody really needs a utility man, and maybe you look at Pat Valleca, who's had a solid 2020, but I think it's a very, very small % chance that somebody gives up
he has been
assets for Pat Valleca, and he's also struggled recently in the field.
He's been struggling in the field. Yeah, that does not help.
I think he's about a 1%.
Okay.
A 0.5%.
It would have to be a cash considerations type deal.
Yeah,
and some of these
absolutely.
may be cash consideration type deals.
But then even with Pat Valleca, I mean, a guy like Brock Holt isn't on a team right now. So if you're a team that needs somebody like Pat Valleca, you would probably go with Brock Holt first.
Exactly. There are guys out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Position players. These are the guys I think have above 0% chance of getting traded. Let's start with the veteran of this group, Jose Iglesias, who is currently injured, hoping he's going to come back soon. off to an absolutely blistering start at the plate, hitting .400, crushing the ball, hitting a ton of doubles. I mean, when he has been healthy, he has been, crazily enough, the best offensive player pretty much in this lineup. The biggest hurdle here is his injuries. Because if he were fully healthy for this whole season, I would say there's a much higher % chance that he gets dealt. But the fact that he has not been healthy, he's been in and out of the lineup, and now he's on the IL, it just makes it so difficult to convince a team that he's going to be ready and healthy for a full month plus the playoffs.
The thing with me with Jose Iglesias as well is that when you look around the league at shortstops, it seems like every team has a really good shortstop. And I don't think his positional value, the position of shortstop itself is a very valuable position, but it seems like every contender has a good shortstop. Yeah. I mean, look at the American League. Willy Adames in Tampa Bay, Gleyber Torres, Bo Bichette, Jorge Polanco, Tim Anderson, Francisco Lindor, Marcus Semien, Carlos Correa, J.P. Crawford. That's every contending American League team and their shortstop. I don't think he is an upgrade at really any of those spots, at least not enough of an upgrade to make a move for. So yeah. I don't see a high % chance that Jose Iglesias gets dealt, purely because I don't think a lot of teams need help at the shortstop position. Unless you want to put him at like a second base or third base. We know he's great in the field and he could probably bounce around a little bit. But if he's sticking at shortstop, everybody just has a good shortstop now.
The only way I could see him, he would probably have to go to a team. I thought of, actually, you mentioned Bo Bichette with the Blue Jays. Bichette is still injured. He's expected to rejoin the team at some point, but it would probably take somebody going down in the next week, or I guess less than a week until Monday, like a Bo Bichette. They say, oh man, he's going to be out for the rest of September, he's going to be out for the playoffs, or he's going to be out up until the last week of the regular season, and they need somebody to plug and play. Right. That would be my guess.
Or the Yankees, too. I mean, everybody on that team is on the injured list right now.
And he has a team option for 2021, which teams just chef's kiss love. So I get the enticing thing about him, but I agree. I think there is not enough need at this point. And if they have that team option, Mike Elias can happily exercise that, keep him under team control next year, see what the market is in the offseason, see what the market is at next year's trade deadline, and maybe get a bigger return for a guy when there is a significant need. I mean, I think of, this is a very different comparison, but like it would take somebody like, remember back when the Dodgers traded for Manny Machado, they had a set shortstop at that position at that time, but he went down with an injury for the entire year. So they needed somebody just for that time period to fill in and give them, quality play. So that's the only. I give it a 19% chance of getting traded.
Yeah, I'd give it about a 10% chance of getting traded.
Okay.
The thing is, too, he's been the number 3 hitter for the Orioles. He will not be the number 3 hitter if he gets traded to another team.
This is true. He won't. All right, no, next up, another veteran guy, and this is a guy that we disagreed on. Brian Holiday, I think, has a chance to get traded. Look, he's never been a great hitter. He's a .241 lifetime hitter, but he's an okay defensive catcher, and we just saw a guy by the name of Rob Brantley, who is a lighter hitter, get traded for essentially cash considerations to the Yankees and was assigned to their minor league player pool. My point is, I think that there are teams that are willing to take on that are looking for a third catcher, and Brian Holiday could fit that bill. I don't think it would obviously not be for much, but I think Mike Elias would be willing to give him up for cash considerations / player to be named later.
I think we have a slight disagreement on the value of it. Personally, I have a hard time believing that a team is going to go out and shop for a Brian Holiday.
I think that third string catchers are still valuable at some point.
Sure. I think there's some value there. Again, my thing is just that I don't know if Brian Holiday is a good enough player at this point to be traded in any capacity.
I think that his defense, which is, I would say at this point, probably above average, and he's a veteran guy, at behind the plate. I think that is what makes him somewhat valuable to teams. And we see light-hitting catchers, rack up 20-year careers because they can hit 220 for their careers, but so long as they're solid defensively, they'll latch on to teams. I think the Yankees, speaking of the Yankees, don't they have like 40-year-old Eric Kratz?
Yeah, Eric Kratz started at catcher yesterday.
So, there are, these guys will find jobs. Up until they're 40 years old, doesn't matter how low they're hitting, so long as they are providing okay defense. I think that there's a slight chance that he gets traded. I give it a 9% chance.
Yeah, I guess I'd give it about a 5% chance. I don't know. Right now, especially in the weird 2020 trade deadline, are you going shopping for a number 3 catcher who is probably going to be on your taxi squad?
Yeah.
And would you trade for that guy in still a pandemic season? Is my thing as well.
I think it would just have to be something so small. It would just have to be cash or international.
I could see that.
I don't know if they can trade international signing bonus money, actually, at this point. I'll have to look that up.
I don't know.
All right, 2 more guys that I think have a higher than 0% chance, but a less than 5. Hanser Alberto and Pedro Severino. Severino is injured currently. I give him a 1% chance or 2% chance, and Hanser Alberto 5%. Because, and Michael I said this at last year's trade deadline, you have to be getting back something that is better or equal value at least to what you're giving up. And at this point on their current contracts, those guys are just going to be more valuable than anything you get back.
Right, and I think Pedro Severino is a pretty good candidate to be re-signed by the Orioles for the next few years. So I really don't think that you would get value for him, more, like you said, more value for him than he is currently giving you right now. Because when he's healthy, he is a middle-of-the-lineup bat who has given you solid defense and incredible production offensively. We saw the other day that there was a vote for the would-be all-star teams for the 2020 season, and Pedro Severino was the starting catcher for the American League.
What's crazier is
deservedly so. And I don't think that you would be getting good enough prospects in return for Pedro Severino.
No.
The 1-2 punch with him and Chance Sisco right now has been really effective in this Orioles lineup, and I think you want to keep that. And the same point, again, like you said, would hold true for Hanser Alberto, where you just aren't getting enough value in return. And Alberto, too, he's a fan favorite. Yeah. And that would be a really tough deal to trade Alberto for, a prospect who might not be that exciting.
Yeah.
If it's not a great prospect, I would be surprised if the Orioles traded not only a guy who's been a very productive hitter for average in the lineup, but also a guy who's a fan favorite.
Yeah, I really don't see and they're on their current contracts. They're pre-arbitration eligible. Like, that is just so valuable to a team. So valuable to a team. So you just don't give those guys up unless you're getting somebody who is...
And the infield right now is very thin. You're starting Pat Valaika and Andrew Velasquez pretty consistently. I don't think the Orioles can afford to trade an Alberto right now, because then who do you put at second?
Yeah, they would have to sign somebody off the street.
Call up Rylan Bannon.
Yeah, and they wouldn't want to rush somebody like that.
Right.
All right, veteran starters, couple guys. I think there's a chance Tommy Milone gets dealt. And the reason I say that is because he's a lefty and because he's a starter. And starters are valuable to teams at the deadline. He's not going to be a tier 1 guy in terms of trade candidates, or tier 2, or probably tier 3 in terms of veteran starters on the market. But he has an even 4 ERA on the season in 6 starts. He's got 9.5 Ks per 9, which would be a career high for a season. He's got a 4.55 career ERA. If a team is desperate, and I think there are some desperate teams out there, he could be a guy that goes for very little.
Yeah. Again, my thinking with this is if you are a contender and you want to make a deal for Tommy Milone in 2020, if you're trading for a starting pitcher at the 2020 trade deadline, you have to be under the assumption that he is going to start meaningful games, because otherwise you wouldn't trade for the guy, right? So
I don't
if
think
you're a contender, are you trading for Tommy Milone to start meaningful games? I could see the value in him as a long reliever, as a swingman.
Yeah,
I think there's certainly value there.
Right.
But I don't know if you would bring Tommy Milone in to start meaningful playoff games.
No, he wouldn't start playoff games. No, but I'm saying just to fill out a rotation.
I
mean,
think so.
if you go with a 3 or 4 man rotation in the playoffs, he's your 5th starter, or he's your maybe you're getting a guy back in September if somebody's down. I mean, I think of teams like the Braves that are hopefully going to be adding Cole Hamels back into the rotation. They're hopefully going to be adding guys at the deadline. But if they need a spot start and a guy who's not going to explode on them, hopefully, and a guy who's a veteran, and they might go and somebody that they don't have to invest money in after this season. I just think that there is some slight value there.
Yeah, I think the value comes in a long reliever swingman type of role.
Exactly. I not a bona fide. He would not go to a place. I just think teams get desperate. I mean, the Phillies just traded top prospects for Brandon Workman, who's never been good.
And look at the injuries this year, too. I mean, there have been...
To the pitchers, to the starting pitchers.
31, however many games we're through right now, there have been almost twice as many injuries to pitchers as there were last year.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Right. And
non-COVID related injuries.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, Richard Blyer has been, we mentioned him as one of the more consistent pieces, but the fact that the Orioles were able to deal him, they might not have been able to deal him in a regular season. It's just because of the Marlins needed 18 guys. So here you go. So maybe an outbreak, God forbid, an outbreak happens, or another starting pitcher, high caliber starting pitcher goes down, and they just need to fill a spot. That's the value I think Tommy Milone could bring. So 22% for me.
Sure. I'd hang right around there. I think about a 20% chance that Tommy Milone gets dealt.
All right, here's the second biggest trade candidate I think the Orioles have, and that's Alex Cobb. I am at 61% chance of getting dealt.
Where are you getting the 61%?
It's not 60, it's 61, Brendan.
Okay.
I
just wanted to clarify.
It's not 60, it's 61.
Okay.
Yeah.
He did the math.
Alex Cobb, I think, has a contract that is not favorable. That is the biggest impediment to him being dealt, because this is not a situation of an Andrew Cashner where Andrew Cashner was on an expiring contract. Absolutely, a team's going to sign up for that. Alex Cobb is under contract for next year. He's got how many millions tied up for next year?
The contract that he signed was a 4-year, $57 million contract that keeps him with the club through 2021. So a team would get this year of control and the full year next year of control.
So the Orioles would probably have to chip in money. The thing is, some of that money is backloaded, or is is spread out over the years after 2021. Deferred. There's the word.
Yeah.
Some of that money is deferred. So that kind of helps, I guess. So a team doesn't have to pay all that money next year in a year where they may be saying we're cash strapped. Who knows? But I do think he still has value because he has a 3.73 ERA at this point. He has his highest K per 9 since 2017, and he looks like a legitimate starter again.
Yeah, and I think this is the difference between a guy like Cobb and a guy like Tommy Milone. If you're trading for Cobb, you are probably inserting him as the number 3, number 4 pitcher in your rotation, and he's probably going to start some meaningful games. The thing with Alex Cobb, the reason that I was hesitant to have his, percentage of a trade be 80, 90% is, like you said, that contract.
Yeah.
If you're a team that is trading for Alex Cobb, I think it has to be a team that is a top contender, because I think you have to inherit that risk of, if you trade for Alex Cobb and you don't go far in the playoffs, you are now on the hook for a guy for $15+ million over the next 2 years, who is going to be your number 3 or number 4 starter. Now, if you can find the value there and say, we need a guy who's going to pitch Game 4 in a meaningful playoff series, and you think Alex Cobb can be that guy, then that contract value absolutely is worth it. I mean, you look at the Red Sox and a guy like Nathan Eovaldi, he is being paid more than he is worth right now, in my opinion. He's getting paid around $17 million a year, I think. But Eovaldi was great in the postseason, and helped the Red Sox win a World Series. So at the end of the day, no matter how Eovaldi is pitching going forward, that's a contract you'll take if Eovaldi helps you win a World Series. And if Alex Cobb is able to help a team win a World Series, then you're going to take that contract for 2021, even if it's not the most favorable thing in the world.
Right. And honestly, the fact that it is a shortened season might, I think, in some weird way help his trade value because you're not asking him to stay healthy for all that long. I think if a team traded for him on July 31st, or like when Cashner got traded last year in early July, you're asking then Alex Cobb to stay healthy for July, August, September, and then October. That's 4 months as opposed to maybe 2 months. So, which is kind of crazy, but you're not at, he is still injury prone. He could very well break down on a team if they trade for him, and they have to know that when they trade for him. So the fact that they are just asking him to make 6 more regular season starts or 7 more regular season starts and then 1-2 playoff games or whatever it may be, or be a swingman out of the bullpen in playoff games, I think that honestly helps his trade value.
I could see Cobb getting dealt to a team like the Braves.
That
was the most logical landing spot for me. We've already seen the Braves get hit with that injury bug with Mike Soroka going down for the year. I mean, he was the ace of that rotation. They've been calling up some of their top prospects. We just saw Ian Anderson no-hit the Yankees through 5 innings in his debut. He looks like he's going to be fantastic. But if you're the Braves, you would definitely prefer to have some more veteran guys in there to go along with the top prospects. So I think they could be a logical landing spot. I think they're going to make some noise in the National League. Obviously, you've got teams like the Dodgers that are kind of the top tier, but I think the Braves are pretty close to that tier. And I think adding a guy like Alex Cobb, while it's not the flashy, Zach Greinke deal from last year, you're not getting a guy who's going to come in and be the ace. Having a solid number 3, number 4 starter is still going to push you forward.
And it might be for a team like the Braves, it might be Cobb and somebody else from another team. It might be Cobb and then a really good starter on another team, and Cobb and Mike Clevenger or something like that, so that you have 2 guys in that rotation that you can fill in. I could see the White Sox also dealing for him, another team that just needs spot starts here and there, considers themselves a contender. All right, relievers. Let's get out of the way the ones that I don't think are going to be dealt. Tanner Scott, still 26 years old. Just don't see that happening. Miguel Castro starting to, it appears, find himself. Still only 25, which is crazy. These guys are too valuable to deal at this point.
Yeah, and Castro's stuff in particular, I mean, oh my goodness. He has some of the nastiest stuff in the league.
It's electric.
And we've heard buzz about Tanner Scott. Some of his teammates were saying that he could have some of the best left-handed stuff in the American League.
I mean, his fastball is like a true rising fastball.
Yeah.
And it's always been control for him. So those guys starting to figure it out, I think the Orioles want those guys to succeed, and they want them to succeed in Baltimore, at least for the time being.
Yeah, and they're guys that could logically be bullpen pieces when, the Orioles in a few years look to get out of the more rebuild phase and go into the contending phase. I think these are 2 guys that could stick around in the bullpen.
3 guys: Sean Armstrong, Cole Sulser, Michael Givens. Armstrong, I only think, could be dealt because of his age and the fact that he's having a good season. So I give him a 9%. He's 29 years old, and he is having a solid year. It's still, ERA right around 2. Has been very good in, honestly, some pretty high-leverage situations for the Orioles. So I think just because of his age, I could see him getting dealt.
Yeah, I could see it. The thing with relievers that I'm going to bring up, I know we're going to talk about Michael Givens. Relievers are pretty volatile in their seasons in how consistent they are. I mean, Sean Armstrong is a guy who came from Seattle because the Mariners got rid of him because he had an ERA of over 15. And now he's come to the Orioles and seems to have found his spot a little bit and is having a solid season. But if you're a contending team, again, we know contending teams pretty much always need bullpen help, it seems. But would you trade for a guy who really doesn't have that track record? Right. I think that's the biggest question with Sean Armstrong.
Yeah, I mean, that's I agree. And you just do see, I think some teams just buy into one season. They think it may only be this year that this guy is good, but we're going to cash in on this year. We're going to try to get him for this year. All of a sudden, these guys that have been mediocre relievers are having great years, and you see teams shell out tons and tons of prospects or whatever it is for these guys, just because they're like, he's having a great year, he's found it this year, he may not be next year, but like let's buy it, let's cash in on this. Yeah, Edwin Diaz is an example. I see Daniel Hudson for the Nationals. Never great reliever at any point in his career. Fine reliever, but like a 4 ERA guy. Last year having a career year, Nationals said we got to get him, and then he ended up having a great second half and pitching in the World Series. So I could see that happening, but still not likely for Shawn Armstrong. Cole Sulser, I put at 36% because he's 30 years old, and he does have a slight track record. Did not allow a run last year for the Tampa Bay Rays in like 7 appearances. I think that he potentially has some interest to a team that is desperate. There are teams out there that are desperate for bullpen help.
Again, it's the same thing for me as it was with Armstrong. I don't think Sulser has long enough of a track record for a team to really trust him. But again, it's hard to find really good track records with relievers, because a lot of the time they're just having one good season here, one good season there. And if Sulser seems to be trending in the right direction for 2020, then, like you said, maybe a desperate team that really needs a reliever will make a move for Cole Sulser. I don't think it's incredibly likely. I would put my percentage a little closer to the 15-20% range rather than the 31%, was it?
36.
36%. Sorry, I can't keep your very specific numbers.
36.7.
Okay.
Repeating.
I'm glad you clarified.
Repeating,
yeah. I would put him more towards a 15.2% chance.
I would say pi divided by times 7%.
That makes sense.
Yeah. That's a really high number. That's like 28. I don't know.
We're not math majors.
All right. Michael Givens is the most likely trade candidate for the Baltimore Orioles because he is having a great year. He has been a trade candidate for quite a while for the Baltimore Orioles. Really a great story in terms of a great story in the organization of a former shortstop converted to pitcher. They figured him out. He had several great years, has really struggled specifically in the 2018-2019 seasons. He gave up a home run last night. That was the go-ahead homer, but he just looks better. And I just think this is the guy. You talk about teams not having track records to go by. They have a track record for Michael Givens, and it is pretty solid.
Yeah, and before last night's game, Givens had an ERA of 0.77. He hasn't been used in the highest leverage situations this season. I think that's been a good move from Brandon Hyde. You're using him in a lot of 7th, 8th innings, and I think that's probably a better spot for him. I don't know if a team would trade for Givens right now to be the everyday closer.
No, and he struggled in that role last year.
And I think it would be probably a similar move to when the Yankees traded for Zach Britton. He didn't come in and be the everyday closer. He came in to be the 7th, 8th inning guy, and he was really effective in that role. And I could see Givens realistically having a similar type of role with a contending team. This is at the point where I would be surprised if Givens wasn't dealt.
Yeah.
We've talked about a lot of guys that I would be surprised if they were. I would be very surprised if Michael Givens was not traded at the 2020 trade deadline. I was surprised when he wasn't traded last year.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people were. So this is a reliever that has actually been consistently good, which is something that is hard to find in relievers. And I think a team could trade for him and put him in that 7th, 8th inning role, and he would be really effective.
Yeah.
He's got 19 strikeouts in just 13 innings pitched this season. I think he fits that 7th, 8th inning role perfectly.
Yeah, only cost the team this year $3.23 million under arbitration. Final year next year, so a team doesn't have to commit a whole lot of money. They still have him under control for a year, so they're not trading for just a month of him. And honestly, if they do trade for him now, I do think that Mike Elias will get more at this deadline for Michael Givens than he would have at last year's deadline, which takes patience. And you talked about, you were surprised. I was surprised, too, that he didn't get traded last year's trade deadline. But now's the time. I mean, now is the time. He's got a 1.38 ERA. Last year he had like a 4.50 ERA and really struggled. So you really were not going to get a whole lot for him. Now is the time to deal him, and I think they could get a fairly high return. Maybe I don't know. I'm imagining 3 prospects, maybe all to be named later, maybe one at a 60 man, but I think this is a potential 3 prospect deal.
Yeah, I don't think his value is going to be any higher than it is right now.
Right. I agree. So that is our preview of the trade deadline, which is just around the corner. But who knows? Maybe the Orioles won't trade anybody. Maybe they'll just stand pat. Maybe they'll buy.
They won't buy. They will not buy.
Yeah, Dylan Bundy could be coming back to the Orioles at some point. No, but at least we're going to see some kind of movement at this deadline, whether it is from the Orioles or from other teams, has the potential to be quite interesting. We mentioned it earlier, but Trey Mancini has his own podcast. It's called Call Your Shot, and he hosts it with Sarah Perlman, former host of MASN All Access. I talked to Trey about that podcast. Here's our interview. Now we're joined on the MASN All Access Podcast by Orioles first baseman, outfielder, and of course, host of the Call Your Shot podcast, Trey Mancini. Trey, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me on, Paul.
So let's start about this podcast. And, well, actually, let's put that on the back burner because first and foremost, how are you feeling? How are you doing? How many treatments do you have left? Could you give us a health update?
Yes. So I went for my 10th treatment this week. So I have 2 left. And then, I should be done, have my final scans right after that, and then getting my port out. So it's nearing the end here. So just kind of counting down the days. So really looking forward to that. So this week was a little tougher than the last few have been, actually. It's the crazy part of this is you never really know how you're going to handle it, how you're going to feel during the week. And this one hit me a little harder for whatever reason. It's been really random. So I've had 10 treatments so far. The second, the fourth, and this 10th one have probably been the toughest. So there's no rhyme or reason really for why. Sometimes it's different and hits you a little harder, but I'm definitely better today than I have been the past 3 days. So turning a corner here. So I'm glad I don't have to go back for another couple weeks. So kind of have, some time to work out and do some things so kind of glad that I'm over that hump of not feeling great this week.
That's great. Do you have a plan after the treatments end, or is it just kind of a wait and see type thing?
So after the final scans and everything like that, and getting the port out, I don't go back for another 3 months. So I go under surveillance is what it's called. So every 3 months I'll go in and have a meeting with my oncologist, get some scans just to make sure everything looks good and make sure my blood work looks good. So obviously you want to monitor that pretty closely after you finish up chemo. So that's the plan going forward. And that coincides well with, starting the season next year, right when I get back up to Baltimore to start the season. That'll be about 3 months since my last visit to her would be at the end of December. So it works out really well. And I'm thankful to, have all my doctors and nurses and everybody there in Baltimore. They've been incredible.
That's great. Now, I don't want to give away too much because you detail quite a lot of interesting things about your story in the Call Your Shot podcast. You've already released your first episode. You're co-hosting with Sarah Perlman. How did this podcast come about?
Yeah, so we, during quarantine, we've, just been hanging out, kind of doing what everybody else has been doing, just watching new TV shows. But obviously we've had a lot more to deal with my cancer, and Sarah's become basically an at-home nurse for me. So it's been a whirlwind, obviously, for us the last 5 months. So, whenever I'm done playing one day, I would be interested in doing broadcasting in some sense. And obviously Sarah's in that field. So we thought it would be really fun to, just start a little podcast and just talk about what the last 5 months have been like for us. Cause it's been crazy, and we get a lot of messages from people wishing us well, wanting to know how everything's going. So we thought the best way to maybe, update everybody and spread the word about, a lot of different things would be doing this podcast together. And we got really good feedback from the first episode, and it was just so much fun. I mean, we really did just have a conversation like we always do every day here, talking about everything. So yeah, I'm really excited about it.
Yeah. I mean, you were literally recording on your couch, I'm pretty sure. Is Olympia, your dog, involved in the podcast at all? Is she trying to get her voice heard?
Oh yeah, absolutely. She's over there chewing a table right now, actually. So yeah, I think we're gonna have an episode coming up soon detailing kind of why we decided to get a dog too, and what it's been like raising a dog, because there's been a huge spike, especially in our apartment building. It's just there's a huge influx of puppies right around when we got her in late April. So, So yeah, we kind of were part of the quarantine puppy crew. So yeah, raising her, it has its challenges, but she makes us so happy, and it's just such a loving dog, and we couldn't be happier to have her.
That's awesome. She is adorable from all the pictures and videos that I have seen of her.
Yeah.
So what? Yeah. So you mentioned some of the topics that you want to hit on this podcast. How much of this podcast is going to be baseball, and how much of it is going to be your treatments, what you're going through? How is this going to be a total mix of topics going forward?
Yeah, a total mix of topics. I'd almost say, yeah, like I said earlier, it's not really a baseball podcast at all. Obviously, I have a background, and I'll say some stuff about it, talk about how I watch the game every night, and cheer for the guys on TV. And it's true what they say, baseball is a lot easier from the couch, by the way. So yeah, it's easy to sit on the couch and look at a pitch and say, oh, that looks like a good pitch to hit. But, once you're in the game, it's a lot tougher. So it's been strange, seeing the guys on TV and not being there with them. But like I said, I've been so proud of the way they've been playing so far. They've got such a good group, and it's just a huge testament to the culture being built there. And that started, right when Hyder came in, and a lot of the messages that he's instilled in us, I think people are seeing this year. The guys are really playing for each other and clicking, and a lot of guys are making a name for themselves. So it's been so fun to watch a lot of guys, really make a name for themselves. And I wish I was up there with them when they were doing it, but I can't wait to be back with them soon.
Well, I know you're shouting at the TV often from your couch. Are you texting these guys or calling these guys before or after games?
Oh yeah. I'll text every time Rio hits a homer. I'll send him a text message. And when Chance led off for the first time the other day, I tried to give him some sage advice from my days leading off. Some things like that. And then, texted Mountcastle when he got called up. So I'll definitely, and then I talk to a lot more of the guys too whenever they're doing well. So I just always want to, stay close and let them know that I'm following and watching, even though I'm not able to be up there with them.
At some point during the rest of the season, or maybe after the season, are you going to have some of your teammates on the podcast as guests, or do you have plans for guests?
Yeah, most definitely. So, I'd love to have everybody on there. So yeah, that's definitely part of the plan for sure.
Well, I definitely agree with you. You mentioned on the podcast that you've been watching The Wire, but you do still think Breaking Bad is maybe the greatest show of all time. I have to agree with that take. I know Baltimoreans might not like it, but it's bold for putting that out there.
And it might be a matter of what show you watch first too, because obviously The Wire came on TV before Breaking Bad. So, but I watched The Wire after Breaking Bad. So I think a lot of times, you always latch onto the first show you watch. So that could be the situation for me here too, because The Wire really, transcended television, and it's a show that will always go down as I think a top 3, top 5 show of all time, and I think Breaking Bad is too. But if I had to choose, I say Breaking Bad's still my favorite.
See, these are the kind of fiery takes that I can't wait to hear on the Call Your Shot podcast.
I've got a few bold Office takes I can offer up too. So I'm obsessed with The Office, so I'm preparing to. Some people might not be too happy with a couple things I have to say about it, but we'll see.
This is going to turn into a first take with Sarah and Trey. I can't wait.
Yeah.
So besides the podcast, what kind of off-season plans? It's crazy we're already talking about the off-season, but the season is over pretty much in a month. The regular season is, at least. What kind of off-season plans do you have?
I just want to have a normal off season. So I'll obviously start hitting earlier than I would have. In a normal year, usually I start hitting in about December. I'll take a couple months off after the season, but I've had my time off, from baseball activities during my treatment. So I'm really itching to get back in the cage and just excited to, start swinging the bat again and doing baseball activities, especially since the games have been coming on TV. It makes you want to do it even more. So I'm just looking back to getting back to normalcy, honestly. Obviously, 2020 threw everybody in the world for a loop, and Sarah and I in particular here, dealing with, cancer and everything it's thrown at us. But just getting back to normal and things like that sounds pretty darn good right now.
And you mentioned it earlier, but do you still have plans to return for the 2021 season on time?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. As by all accounts, everything's looking pretty good right now. So as long as my scans look good, I should be healthy and cleared to start doing baseball activities pretty much immediately whenever I want after the scans are over. When, right when the season ends is when my final scans are. So after that, I should be good to go. And I'm, fully planning on being there in 2021.
That's terrific news, Trey. I mean, I've listened to the first episode of the podcast. I can't wait to listen to more. I mean, as you know, I broke my wrist because I am terrible at tennis, and I was feeling down on myself last week, and I put on the podcast, and it just kind of put everything into perspective. I mean, what you guys have gone through over the past 5-ish months, the way that you have shown through this whole thing, the way that Sarah has, as you mentioned, been a nurse basically to you is
I mean, I there's zero shot I get through this the way I have without her. I just can't say enough about what she's done for me. And, obviously from a physical standpoint, like helping me take the port out, everything, she's like I said, learn how to be a nurse, but from a mental standpoint too. I've been handling everything really well, and that's all because of her. So, having somebody like that in your life and to be with you every step of the way like that, it's hard to put into words what that means. So, that's helped me just, more than I can even say.
That's really awesome. And I'm sure that all of Baltimore has your back, and we all have your back here. And we can't wait to see you come back to a baseball field. But in the meantime, it's great to hear your voice on a podcast. It's great to hear my former co-host on MASN All Access on back in the airwaves too. But where can we hear your podcast coming up?
Yeah, so it just got on Apple.
Nice.
So we're on Apple now, Spotify, and there's one other outlet I think, but it's Apple and Spotify. I know it's on those two.
Sounds good. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Trey, thanks so much for coming on and talking about the podcast, talking about how you're doing. We really appreciate the time.
All right. Thanks, Paul. Thanks so much for having me on.